Hello and welcome to the Sexient Being Sessions. Today we're here to talk about unveiling desire. So, we're really going to be diving into the world of consent and how that relates to sexual relationships and BDSM relationships. We're going to look at delving into the depths of speaking your true yes and your true no, the transformative impact this has on intimacy and pleasure, um, being able to ask for what it is you want to help liberate your desires, to help tap into their hidden potential if you're not pursuing these things already, and being able to communicate them within a partnership with play partners, however that looks for you, to use this to help ignite your curiosity and empower yourself within your relationships and within your sexuality. I'm Alix Pruett, a certified sex, love, and relationship coach with a BDSM and kink focus. I work with men, women, and couples plus who want to transform their old patterns, pain, and beliefs so they can create thriving relationships that are deeply connected, playful, and fulfilling within themselves and with others. So let's really just start diving in here. So, one of the first important pieces that always comes up for me around consent in unveiling your desires is a person's ability to speak their authentic yes and no. And while many people may think that speaking your yes and no is just an easy thing, there can be a lot of conditioning we get over the years to tell us that we need to say yes in certain situations, even though there's a no lingering for us in there. And so we'll tend to go in sort of this please and appease mode. This can be highly related with the fawn response. If you have not heard about this, I definitely recommend looking into it, um, because it can be something that does deeply impact your relationships or play spaces with other people because either you are wanting to avoid a conflict or some sort of negative repercussion, or if it's somebody doing that to you, they're wanting much of the same. And this, again, it's something that gets conditioned in very, very early within our lives, where maybe at some point in time we told somebody no, and then they proceeded to bully us or give us the silent treatment because they weren't getting what they wanted out of us. It becomes this narrative of I I need to do for the other person so I avoid pain. And while that mentality, while that viewpoint definitely served at a certain point in time, as we move into being adults, recognizing that there is value in our yes and our no, then it can be harmful and detrimental not only within our own being, which I'll talk about in a moment, but within our relationships. So how can this be detrimental in our body when we're not recognizing our no? So in my own experience, and this may seem like an extreme, but it is the conclusions I came to through my own self journey. It was that when I was giving a yes when it was actually a no, I was sort of being my own worst rapist in many ways. I was delving into these realms of doing something that I really didn't want to do on some level or didn't call to me. And I actually broke down the trust within my own nervous system that the thing I wanted to experience wasn't good enough, it wasn't valuable enough. What the other person wanted was more. And granted, there was a part of me that wanted to, again, avoid the conflict, avoid them being upset, avoid a silent treatment, avoid being bullied, whatever it may be. But it actually took away a really valuable piece of my own power to be able to speak that yes and that no clearly. And the same thing came down to my yes. There was an instance where, and this was years ago, I got invited to go to a sweat lodge, and I really didn't have a clear image of what that experience would look like, but it was something that like I really wanted to do. Now, there was a part of me that popped up, and the immediate answer it gave was, well, you can't do that. At this point in my life, I had realized that this voice would pop up, and a lot of the reasons it would give for, well, you can't do that, they they were there to try to protect me in a way, but a lot of the reasoning didn't really make sense, and I didn't really know if it was true or not. So in this instance, going to the sweat lodge, it was going to cost me $50, which seemed exorbitant to this part of me that thought I couldn't afford to go have this experience I wanted to have. Um, I didn't have childcare. Well, I didn't actually know if I had childcare or not because I hadn't asked anyone. And in that, I decided to take that as a key for myself in asking, like creating an inquiry within myself of, okay, well, why can't I? Right. And then just listen to the reasons. And in this case, I decided to call up my mom and be like, hey, can you come down and stay with my son for this weekend so I can go have this experience? I got childcare covered. The $50 really wasn't actually that big of a deal in that moment when it came down to it. Like it didn't cause any sort of major financial strain or anything. So it was interesting again to recognize where an automatic no or you can't do this was popping up in my system, and other times where I've had something that was a no in my system, but I said yes to, again, to make other people happy, to avoid conflict, to give them what they wanted, so I could avoid some sort of pain in them being disappointed, hurt, sad, whatever it was, angry was another one I like to avoid. Um, anyhow, that's the way it becomes detrimental within the self is you are neglecting or creating experiences that you don't actually have an interest in exploring in that moment. And so I'd say one of the key pieces in really coming down to, okay, how do I get firm in my authentic yes or no, is if something doesn't feel like an easy yes or an easy no, where like that's just the whole answer, there's no rebuttal showing up in your system of a, well, maybe, or trying to convince yourself otherwise, then take a moment to look at it. And again, for me, when it came down to the situation where it was a yes, but the saying of I can't would pop up, I actually learned for myself that the I can't was a sort of trigger, and it gave me a point of curiosity to look further at. And I have other narratives that pop up around that, very simple lines or phrases that come up in my lines of thinking, especially, that tell me what that looks like. Now, these can look different for everyone. I just want to give you the space to know it's okay to just explore what those things are for you. And if it's not a clear yes and it's not a clear no, know that you can ask for space, because maybe there's something else you need to get clear on. You can also use this as a great opportunity to get curious about what it is the other person is asking from you, right? Or asking if you want to do with them. Because a lot of the time, if we have that little bit more information, then it's easier for us to make a decision on if that's something we want to explore or not. Um, so the next piece to that, as far as identifying your authentic yes and no, and if you're really not clear on how to do that, it's going through and practicing with yourself. And you can do this again completely alone. And what I want to invite you into is there's like three main centers in your body where feelings will tend to arise. One is down in your genitals, so your pelvic region. The second is your heart region, so about the center of your chest. And then the third is typically your brain. And I want you to speak your yes. So actually physically say yes, but in that, just slowly go through and bring your focus to each of those different areas of your body. So, how this would look is you just sit down in a quiet space, preferably, so you can bring as much focus as possible to what's going on and what you're feeling and noticing in your body. As you do this, you can also close your eyes. Again, this is just removing another layer of sensory input so you can bring greater focus to the area. But you're going to sit there, take a few deep breaths, and we'll say you're starting with the focus on your genital region or your root chakra, your pelvic floor, however you want to look at that space. And just say yes repeatedly. And that can be a quiet yes, yes, yes. I also recommend doing this with different levels of excitement. So it could be a quiet yes, it could be a yes, and just go through and notice as much nuanced sensation as you can at this root chakra, the pelvic floor, your genital area, for what sensations exist there that tell you it's a yes. Then you're going to go up and move into that heart center of your body. You're going to do the same thing at this space. And you're going to notice, what does a yes feel like here? Is it warm? Is it cold? Is it hot? Is it tingly? Is it bubbly? Is it contracted? Is it relaxed? Just notice as much nuanced sensation as you can. And then the last one is going to be moving into paying attention to what the space in your head feels like when you're saying a yes. And again, you can use different tone, you can use different variations. You could even do a piece of this where you're saying yes in a way that isn't a full yes for you. I honestly, though, would recommend doing that a little bit later after the second piece of this so you can start distinguishing more of that sensation. Um, Notice if there's like what sorts of thoughts come up when it's an authentic yes for you. If you need actual questions to be there, then ask yourself questions for things you know you really want. Um, and again, just see what that space feels like. Notice any thoughts that stream through when it's a yes. The next piece of this would be to go through your system, again, starting at the root chakra, the pelvic floor, genitals, and say no. And again, varying how you're saying no with your tone, with the energy that you're putting into it. And then again, move up to the heart center and move up to the head. And where I find this to be immensely valuable in my own practice is that I can have things where my body, so my genitals and my heart, right, are very yes to a situation, and then have my head pop in and it's a no. And it's not that the no's are invalid by any means, but it's giving it the space to recognize what's a no. I've also had other times where, let's say, my genital region is not a yes, that one's a no. My heart is a yes, my head is a yes. And I actually ended up over the next like several days after going into this experience having immense body pain, low back pain, cramping in my abdominal region. So I want to give you the room to like figure out, where is my aligned yes. So you're touching on the pelvic region, so your desires, you're touching on your heart region, your emotions, your love, right? And then aligning that with the rational mind when you move up into the head. Um, but yeah, so that's giving you more of a frame to notice how those things feel. And again, like give yourself the permission to say, I need time to think about that, or I need a little bit of space. Like I'll get back to you in a day, 2 days, whatever that time is you need. Maybe it's only 10 minutes, but just know that you can ask for that space as well. And let's say the person needs to know right now, or they're moving on to the next. That's okay too. You get a choice in, like, I'm going to pass on this experience, or I'm going to dive into it. And again, there's no rights or wrong. It's only what's right for you in that moment. All right. So asking for what you want is the next piece of this. And one thing I can say as a coach, as a person who has lived on this planet, and somebody who likes to look highly at relationships and human behavior, is we are not great at asking for what we want or knowing what we want a whole lot of the time. Actually, as a coach, it's one of the first things I do. And sometimes it can take an entire hour-long session or more, is helping people get really clear on what it is they do want. A lot of the time, we will end up focusing on the negative aspects. So, the things we don't want to have happen, the things we don't want to experience, rather than getting clear on what it is we actually really want to have happen. So, that first reframe to being able to ask for what you want is get clear on what it is you actually want. And one way I'll even do this for myself and with clients is let them go through all the things they don't want. So let's say they really don't want to be experiencing pain and heartbreak in relationships anymore. Well, then you take that negative aspect and kind of try to flip it. And it's taking it to the, okay, if you weren't experiencing those things, what would you be experiencing instead? Because if you take those away, there's still a universe of possibilities. So if they didn't have those things, if you didn't have those things, what would you have instead? And that can help get to the root of the core desire. It's also a great shift for how to change your focus. I know in, again, my own experience, when I was focusing on all the things I didn't want, I tended to actually notice those things because my focus was on that filter, that lens of the things I don't want. Well, the subconscious mind doesn't recognize the don't, it just recognizes the things you're focused on. And so if I wasn't wanting to experience people lying to me or all these myriad of other things, or my partner being angry at me, or me being angry at my partner, like my focus would always come to the points where I was potentially picking up information that said my partner was angry or I was angry, versus when I bring my focus to, I want to create loving, compassionate spaces where there's open communication, my lens shifts when my focus is actually on those things and I actually look for ways to create those spaces on a conscious and subconscious level. So the second piece to this is, so you get clear on what you want, then it's being able to ask for what you want. And this is so important, especially when it comes to consent spaces, because a lot of the way that we end up getting trained to be in control, to be dominant, let's say, is to just tell other people what we want. I don't personally recommend this. Um, Again, for me, it can come across as demanding. If you have, like, again, agreed upon spaces where you tell the other person what you want them to do, and that has your agreed upon dynamic, then cool. That's awesome. When you ask the question, though, it becomes an invitation. And there's a difference between this space of telling somebody what you want them to do and asking them to do something for you or asking them to be in an experience with you. Um, and that it comes down to a different mentality. So if I tell my partner I want him to massage my feet, that that can be a great piece of information for him, but maybe he doesn't really want to massage my feet at that point in time. And now that can just feel like a demand and something he has to do rather than, again, this invitation into an experience with me. And I don't know, to me, it's a lot more likely to create conflict or, again, somebody doing something they don't really want to be doing. In the other instance of I invite my partner into giving me a foot rub, right? I ask him if he wants to be a part of that. So that could be like, hey babe, like I could really use a foot rub. Would you be open to giving me one? Then that gives him the opportunity to say yes or no based on his capability at that time and desire. And if he doesn't want to, for me, it removes a layer of taking it personally. If he doesn't do it, I don't have an expectation that my partner has to do this thing for me. In the space of poly relationships and sex, that really becomes a little bit easier because if he can't fulfill that, then I can go get that fulfilled in another way, especially when it comes to sexual interactions or finding another partner who is open to that experience. But again, like it's an invitation into what the other person's capable of, into the experience they also want to be sharing with you, versus it being a demand or an entitlement to something they owe you or that they need to give you or anything along those lines. Um, so what are some ways to work on asking for what you want? Because it can be scary to ask for what you want. It can feel like a very vulnerable space to, again, invite somebody else into an experience with you. Um, One of my absolute favorite examples of this, and this came from a TED talk I heard years ago, was around the idea of kissing someone. And this was a presenter talking about, okay, you're at a party and you start chatting with a girl that you find really attractive and things are going well, and you guys happen to go out onto this balcony and you just look at her and you decide you want to kiss her. And there's a few options here, right? You can just go in for the kiss. Well, how does that feel if she turns away, right? How does that feel like if you start kissing her and then she like pushes you off of her? Like it's a lot more investment of energy when you've actually taken that action. Now, the other option that he presented here was, okay, so let's say you now ask this person if you can kiss them, or tell them like that you want to give them this thing, right? You want to give them a kiss, or you really love to share that experience with them. And they say no. Again, it may not feel great. It's less impactful though when you've asked. Also, how much hotter is it when you actually kiss this person knowing that they want the same thing as you? And again, that's this invitation here of asking, inviting another person into a space and into an experience with you. is you're creating those spaces of like, I want to share this thing. Do you want to share it with me? And when you ask, it's again, it can feel personal at times, but we can also start working on shifting our mentality and where we're at in recognizing that the other person's yes or no is just where they're at. And for me, a lot of that understanding of, oh, another person's yes or no is just where they're at, and it says more about them than it says anything about me, came from me doing my own work around not giving my own authentic yes and no. Because so much of the time, again, I was going into people pleasing. I was going into not wanting other people to be missing out on a situation. Um, Again, not creating conflict, again, avoiding being bullied, hurt, neglected, whatever it was, having somebody else leave. There was a lot in my own experience to unpack around these tendencies of people pleasing. When I was in people pleasing, though, I also tended to think that my answer or somebody else's answer meant something about me rather than their answer just being about where they were at. And admittedly, it was a very selfish point of view. Again, it's a point of view that we get very highly trained into in our society. And so there's nothing wrong with it. It's just taking the time to notice that that exists within our being. If it doesn't exist for you, then that's great, but you're probably still not here listening to this if that is the case. So it's an invitation to like take that moment to reflect on where you're at with being able to speak your own yes or no. Like, what are you making it mean if you ask somebody else for something and they tell you no? Because there are 1,000 different avenues or infinite different avenues where you could get that fulfilled that doesn't have to specifically be with that one person. Again, we are talking about sexual relationships, so that will depend on your sexual agreements in your relationship that you have outlined. But if things there aren't working for you and that is something that is highly important to you, then there's also deciding, is that the right relationship for you to get those things fulfilled in? And it may not be. But I want to give the reminder that just because this one person isn't that person to fulfill that, it doesn't mean that there aren't thousands of other people in the world who would be a better match for fulfilling that space. So we talked about people pleasing and identifying your yes and your no and getting into asking for what you want and also being able how to identify what it is you're actually wanting, getting out of the negative narrative of it and moving into where to bring your focus instead on the thing you actually want to be experiencing. One thing I do want to bring up, because this can be really important, is being able to recognize when another person is not actually in a cognitive state to give their own clear yes and no. Um, and this to me relates a lot to uh, altered states of consciousness or very high stress states. Again, it's going to be hard to, or it can be hard to recognize these in people because we all have our own different ways that uh, we end up going into stress responses or how we end up behaving as that like outer mask we present to the world compared to what's going on internally. But it's just a like protect yourself type aspect, because especially for males I've known in the dating world and the BDSM world, I've also seen this go very awry very quickly. for them, especially when it comes to the realms of consent. Um, Whether you consciously realize it or not, when you are entering BDSM type scenes and a lot of sexual encounters, you are actually at a higher level of chance of inducing altered states of consciousness within yourself and within the other person. Um, and one really common way that people look at an altered state of consciousness is when you start inducing alcohol or other drugs and substances. Um, Meditation can be another way that people go into altered states of consciousness in the world of BDSM and kink. That tends to relate to um, subspace, top drop, sub drop. But where I find it really important to get clear on this space is um, sort of that alignment we talked about earlier. So having your yes in your genitals or your root chakra in your heart space and within your rational mind space. Usually, when people are in an altered states of consciousness, they don't actually have access to all three of those at one time. If you think about alcohol, a lot of the time this brings down layers of inhibition, things that typically the rational mind would tell us, like, that's not a good idea. I probably shouldn't do that, right? Um, and people will give a yes a lot more easily than if they hadn't consumed alcohol. The same can go for most other intoxicants. So it's just something to be aware of. It's one of the things I actually personally find a little bit fascinating, going to the local swingers and sex clubs in my area, because they do happen to serve alcohol and have bar spaces on all three of those premises. Um, and that's, to me, a lot of the time when you're in those spaces, it is a very high energy shift. So, same with if you're at a kink event or a BDSM event, it has its own energy. It has its own impact on the system. It can trigger all sorts of stress responses or excitement responses within the nervous system already. And then you're adding alcohol on top of it, which to me creates sort of again, a disconnect from the rational mind, but it also allows a disconnect from actually being connected within our experiences. And my examples of this come down to the the more extreme of, like, when people get blackout drunk, you can actually start noticing that people tend to be more expressive in their emotions. Um, they'll either be the like super happy drunk who's kind of like falling all over the place, or maybe they're the really angry drunk, or they're the sobbing drunk. It's an extreme expression of probably something they've had pent up in their system for a while. The interesting part in looking at the somatics of actually connecting with those emotions, though, because allowing yourself to connect with and feel those emotions can actually create this release in our system. And again, this is my theory on it. I have not done research or heard research that specifically pertains to the effect that it's creating on a somatic base, but my guess is it allows people to tap into that, but because there is this disconnection from, we'll call it the rational mind, um, then they're not fully integrating their experience. They're not actually connected within their experience, which tells me this person is not actually able to make a full choice in this moment. So, again, if you're, let's say you're on a first date, um, and you're talking with the partner, and there hasn't, especially if there has not been a whole lot of conversations around BDSM play, around those negotiations of a scene, anything like that beforehand, and you're now consuming alcohol and you invite them into a play space with you or even to have sex, you're running a much larger risk that that wasn't actually a full yes for them. And it's just an area of forewarning. I have actually dated doms in the past who um, ended up facing rape charges because they were very much so in the hookup scene. I've had other ones where they had other experiences where they they had been told it was a yes and all these things to get feedback that that wasn't actually what the person was wanting. And again, those areas did relate to there was other intoxicants or other things going on within the person's nervous system that didn't give a full yes, whether that was spoken or not. And as far as my understanding goes, from hearing those stories, there was not direct no's spoken with those instances. It is, again, just a forewarning. Like, getting consent is not just in being courteous to another person, it's not just in being hot that the other person says yes. It is also in a way of protecting yourself, in making sure you're doing your due diligence to make sure that, like, this is a yes for the person, that they didn't feel pressured into it and it's not going to come as some sort of backlash down the line that's unexpected in you because you thought you had a yes. So it's a forewarning to take care of yourself in that way. And when you're giving that invitation rather than a demand, rather than just assuming you can go for it because you're feeling a vibe, then it's much more affirming. Again, I'm trying to avoid the space of intoxicants or altered states of consciousness. And I guess that was the other piece of talking about subspace and top space, or subdrop and top drop, is that is also another form of an altered state of consciousness. You, during top drop and, or not top drop, sorry, top space and subspace, very specifically, there is a large rush of endorphins and hormones hitting a person's nervous system. So again, you are not as likely to have the, like, three-tiered system of a yes, of the person's desire, of the person's emotions, and the person's mental faculties all being online to be able to give a solid yes in those instances. And so my biggest recommendation is, like, outs, especially with BDSM scenes, have those negotiations beforehand on what is okay in that play space. And if you are unsure during a scene, and especially a first scene, err on the side of caution. Like, err on being more conservative with your play, and then look for feedback later on after the session has ended when you're doing check-ins to say, okay, what did you really enjoy? What could have shifted that could have made your experience better? Because again, if you're erring on that side of caution, then it's more likely that you can create those lines of communication and you haven't now just plowed through somebody's boundary or broken lines of consent, taken away somebody else's yes because it was never asked for. The same thing can come in with subspace and top drop. Again, so during a play scene for subspace and top space, you have the high rush of endorphins and hormones. At the end of the scene, all those mechanisms that were inducing all those hormones and endorphins to release in the system can now bottom out and crash. So I don't like, if you guys have not pre-negotiated that sex can follow up a BDSM or kink scene, don't assume that's where it's going to go unless you have talked about it. Same with other sorts of physical touch. Like, this is where negotiations ahead of time are so imperative and can create immense amounts of safety and trust between you and especially a new play partner. But this can go into play with a partner that you have had many times over, that you can start implementing these things and it will actually start creating a new foundation, even if this foundation didn't exist previously, so that there can be more trust, more safety, more security, and deeper connection within the relationship. And I did mention feedback briefly after talking about top space, subspace, top drop, sub drop. When you are both out of the realms of that, like, give it till the next day, maybe even 2 days, depending on how it lands for your nervous system. You can also check with whoever you're playing with on what sounds like a good time frame for them, because they're going to know their nervous system best for when they kind of come back to their like resourced normal state of living equilibrium. Ask for feedback. It is one of the things, for how many scenes I have watched, for how many people I have talked to, for how many partners I have had myself, where feedback is typically not asked for, or if it is asked for, it is not asked for well. A lot of the time, it gets aimed at only looking at one or two, or one of the two main areas. So there's two types of feedback. There's opportunity feedback and there's celebratory feedback. And celebratory feedback is typically the feedback most people like hearing. And that's the, what did you love about this experience? It's the thing that excited them. It's what they really took away as being a positive. A lot of the time when we look at opportunity feedback, we can take that as the space of, well, I didn't do good enough, as being criticism or judgmental or whatever it is. But opportunity feedback is just as important, if not more important, than celebratory feedback. Celebratory feedback is amazing because it does let us know what the person enjoyed, right? It lets us feel that excitement with them, especially if they're excited about it. There's these lovely things called mirror neurons that our nervous system will um, literally mirror. It will duplicate and allow us to feel what another person is feeling, because our bodies will unconsciously shift to mimicking what the other person has coming up. But in that, yes, so we tend to love celebratory feedback. It's the thing that kind of like feeds and stokes our egos, that tells us we did a good job. It's like getting the gold star on your paper, or the like A+ mark on a test in school. It's the thing that tells us we're doing great. The opportunity feedback, people don't tend to like as much. Again, it can be that space where, like, if you're taking another person's experience to be anything outside of like being about them, then like you can be taking it personally. And you don't have to take that opportunity feedback as this like, I'm horrible, I'm a terrible person. But as, again, this harsh criticism or judgment, it's an opportunity. So that's where we're wanting to reframe it, of how you can grow, how you can learn. Like, I don't care if you've been a dom for 10, 20 years, you still have things you can learn from and moments of growth. Like, you, just because you are a master does not mean you know it all. And if you come across a top or a dom who says they know it all, I'm going to give a forewarning. It's probably somebody you don't want to play with, because to me, that says they are not open to learning and growing. And anything that uh, says any different to them, they're probably going to reject or get defensive about. Side note from personal experience, inside and outside the BDSM and kink community. Um, but yeah, it's again an opportunity for you to learn and grow. And for me, I have a standard for myself that the people I play with are open to feedback. If I have partners who they just don't care about feedback, then for me that's a place I'm not really interested in. I want other people in my life, whether play partners or not, who are open to growing and learning daily. That's, I consider myself a lifelong learner. And like, I may have people in my life who are not identified as lifelong learners, who are not open to that space, but those are further connections from my primary circle of people who I keep close to me, who are dear to me. Because I'm going to say most of us have gotten some really shitty conditioning around relationships, around how to be in relationships, around having open and heart-centered communication. And we can all keep growing and learning. And that is what the space of the Sexient Beings calls is about. It's creating those spaces to have those conversations, to have it be known that it's okay that, like, we're not perfect in relationships, we're not perfect in our BDSM or kink play or sexuality, and that we always have the ability to grow and expand and learn past there. I think that wraps it up for today. I really want to thank anyone and everyone now or in the future for being here, for listening in. I would love to know, like, what resonates for you. What was your biggest takeaway from this call today? And on YouTube, you can go ahead and post that down below in the comments. If you're interested in working with me as a coach, in tapping into your authentic yes and no, in being able to create thriving relationships that are deeply connected and playful, then you can go over to the link in the description or on the About page, again on YouTube, to book your free discovery call. So until next time, have a great one.